We're going to go ahead and start with introductions. We want to go around the room. So I'm Anna Gazdowitz. I work here in Central IT. So I'm on the IST Drupal team as well as the web accessibility team. And then why don't we go with you, Lucy, and move from there.
My name is Lucy Greco, and I'm the web accessibility evangelist for the web services team here at UC Berkeley. Oh, and under the table we have Frances, my current guide dog. Or maybe she's behind,
She's behind you, yeah.
Here she is, right here. You can lay down, maybe. Lay down.
I'm Caroline Boyden. I work on the web accessibility team and the Drupal team as part of web platform services.
I'm Carrie Salazar. I work for Summer Session Study Abroad and Lifelong Learning and anything.
My name is Cass. I work for the computer facilities at the Educational Technology Services.
My name is Mike Sorolla. I work with the Surplus Operation of Property Management.
My name is Joe Bunnick, and I work with the College of Natural Resources.
My name is Joel Fuller. I'm a front-end web developer for University Relations.
Sam Gordon, Student Affairs Communications.
I'm Brian Wood. I work on the IST Drupal team in the Central IT web platform services.
My name is Willa Chan. I work with Cass, also on ETS.
I'm Matthew San. I work for Student Affairs Communications.
I'm Maggie Crowley. I work for the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences.
Kathleen Wood, Central IT Web Platform Services here at Berkeley.
I'm Brian Mayberry. I work with Equity and Inclusion.
I'm behind you. I'm Emily Berman. I'm a web developer for the College of Engineering.
Great. I think we missed you in the corner there.
I'm Alex Coughlin, and I'm the History Department Communication and Administrative Coordinator.
Great. Okay, so our topic today is creating an accessible website with Drupal. Oopsie.
Do you want me to turn that off temporarily?
Yeah, actually.
Caps lock F4. F3.
Unloading JAWS with JAWS dialog. Are you sure?
Okay.
PowerPoint slideshow.
There you go.
Oh. That's okay.
Sarah, you have to go back to your slide now.
That is okay.
Don't forget about the mouse.
All right, so here's a brief introduction. So as I mentioned, Caroline and I are on the IST Drupal team here at Berkeley, but we are also on the web accessibility team, which is a part of a greater team called Web Platform Services. And Lucy is on the team actually full-time on accessibility, which is very exciting. So just a teeny bit of a background. So just, was it 2 weeks ago at this point, we presented to the WebNet group here on campus, and we did a whole full-fledged thing on the policy as well as our services, and I will do a very brief cribbed version of that so that we can move into then the Drupal part, which is what we're all here for. So the UC Information Technology Accessibility Policy is official UC system-wide as of August 2013, and in a very, very small nutshell, that basically just means that websites and web-based products need to be accessible to those with disabilities, including those who use assistive technology, such as JAWS, which you'll hear Lucy here today. So as the web accessibility team, we are here in general just to answer any questions that you might have about accessibility. You feel free to email us at any time. We also have our website, which I'm not going to visit there quite yet, but this link that I've provided on screen, webaccess.berkeley.edu, evaluating services clinics, that's all about our web access clinics, which we provide free of charge to the campus, where if you come in, we will assess your website for accessibility and give you some tips and advice on how to fix any issues that we might find. So I'm going to pass this over to Lucy temporarily, and she's going to give you just a brief screen reader demo for those of us who have not heard one in action before.
Just a quick poll. How many of you here have not heard a screen reader before?
Say aye.
Aye. Yeah. Aye. Okay. So a screen reader is a generic term for a piece of software that allows a blind or visually impaired individual to access the screen in whatever means or fashion they may need to. So through keyboard commands, I can do things such as get to the menu bar, I can find content on the page, I can read through the page. The way a screen reader typically works is it reads the screen left to right and down. Well, on a web page, as you know, that's going to be very confusing because we have sidebars, we have top navs, we have all the rest of that. So what the screen reader software does is it looks at the source code of the web page and renders it into a virtual representation of that web page in memory in a single vertical column. And the order of the source code dictates what the order of the information I get in that virtual representation is. So if you have your content scattered throughout your source code and your source code isn't in a nice, streamlined order, I may get it in various different chunks that don't make any sense. So I'm going to show you our website really quickly and just do very, very quick. We did a little bit more in-depth one at the WebNet, but this is just a quick, brief. So I'm just going to turn the screen reader on.
JSA version 12.0.
Can everyone hear okay, or should we turn that up? Okay.
Alt tab, Google Hangouts, Alt tab, BDUG, Alt tab, Web Accessibility is Architecture.
And so here is our website. And I'm just going to let it read really quickly, just so you kind of get a feel for it.
Web Accessibility is Architecture, Platforms and Integration. Visited same page link jump to navigation. Mama visited link traffic University of California. Berkeley is Architecture, Platforms and Integration. Visited link Web Accessibility. Search terms, edit, submit, search button, banner, and name, region, heading, level 2. What does Web Accessibility mean for you? The University of California. Visited link Information Technology Accessibility Policy effective August 27, 2013 states that all campus websites and web applications.
So really quickly, you heard a couple visited links there. You heard something about a jump to navigation. That's a standard jump link on the web page. That helps people with keyboard issues or with issues accessing the screen with a mouse. So a person who may have only their use of say one finger might be able to just tab through the web page instead of having to mouse through it. It means that a person doesn't have to go like this.
Tag, main region, responsibilities of the Berkeley campus community.
Oh, sorry, I didn't go to the top like it was supposed to.
Web Accessibility is Architecture. Tag, jump to navigation, same.
So there's the jump to navigation is the first link I hit.
Tag, banner, University of California, Berkeley visited link. Tag, Web Accessibility visited link. Tag, search terms.
So say I wanted to get to one of the navigation links instead as a keyboard-only user.
Web, tag, jump to navigation, same, enter. Visited same page link, jump to navigation. Web Accessibility is Architecture. Visited link, Web Accessibility of UC. Visited link, evaluating your site. Visited link,
and you'll see that I'm now down into the actual navigation links and can start going through the content of this site very easily. And I'm just going to mention one other thing, and then I'm going to hand it over to Anna, which is a website regions, and that's something that's going to come up a little later in the presentation, which is why I want to point it out today. You can use HTML5 regions or something called ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Attributes to create regions on your page for different portions of the web page so that a person using a screen reader can easily jump to those regions. So if I wanted to jump to the main content of this page, it's marked up with the main content landmark.
Main region.
And right there, I'm at the main region of the page.
Heading level 2, what does Web Accessibility mean for you?
And immediately, it just took me one keystroke to get to the main content of this page. I'll just show you a quick
document regions dialog, regions preview, main, to navigation.
So you'll see right there, this is a quick, easy to navigate structure.
Escape, escape.
And then we'll talk about, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the links list and the links. Screen reader users, 99% of them use only links to navigate through a web page. They'll tab through, they'll hear the links, or they'll go to this.
Links list dialog, links list view, web accessibility, 3 of 35.
And you need to have good, clean labels for your links, and they need to be identified very clearly as to what a person's going to be going to when they click on that link. So, for example, if you did not do a good clean tag for your link, and a person was going through this links list, this is completely out of context, and they may not understand. So the most egregious link tag or label a person can put on it is click here. And can you imagine if I was going through here and a bunch of the stuff on this page was just click here? I would just be completely revolted at this point in time. Instead, I can find anything I want on this links list by using the first letter of it if I know what the link is called. So if I wanted to go to my favorite page on this site, which is our Ask Pecan site.
A, Ask Pecan.
I just hit the letter A and I jump to it instantly.
Enter. Ask the CAM web access.
And voila, easy, quick, easy to go. Now you'll see that there's there's a picture of Pecan. Pecan is my former guide dog. Remember when we introduced Frances, I said she's my current guide dog? Well, Pecan was the dog that brought us through the volunteer effort at UC Berkeley. I worked with her for the past 9 years, and Frances just took over from her. So we brought her back in to help out our web accessibility initiative. All right.
All right, so I think we're moving to Caroline now.
All right. And I'll just move over.
Oh, you want to trade places?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Watch for the cords.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got.
The dog is the problem. I believe I turned it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, so how many of you here have built a Drupal theme, either from scratch or with a base theme? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, a bunch of you have. How many of you are site builders or content owners, managers? Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of hands, probably 10, 12. And how many of you are developers, custom code, modules, anything like that? 3, 4. Okay, so that gives you an idea of who we are here. So the basis of building an accessible website with Drupal is, generally speaking, we start with looking at the theme, because the theme is what generates the semantic structure of your site and your pages. So one thing you can do is, if you use a base themes, is you can start with one that's accessible. Two that I'll mention are Zen and the adaptive theme. Those are very, very popular base themes which are built with accessibility in mind. So if you are using a base theme, take a look at Zen or adaptive. And also, when Drupal 7 was being developed, the accessibility community created this accessibility pledge, which was D7AX, Drupal 7 Accessible Experience. And we asked theme and module developers to make the pledge that they would make their themes and modules accessible. So if you're looking at a theme or a module and it has the D7AX pledge on it, it means that the developer is aware of accessibility and is interested in improving their product. And so if you file accessibility issues or ask accessibility questions, they'll be interested in hearing that from you. So I'm going to actually skip ahead just a little bit here. So how many of you said you were? How many of you have built a theme from scratch, not using a base theme? Anyone? One? All right. Well, so how do you know then that either your base theme that you're configuring or the theme you're building is accessible? What's a good way to start with building an accessible website? So I'm going to switch ahead to our top 10 tips for developers and content creators on the web accessibility website. I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to show you these and discuss a little bit what the implications are for Drupal. So our first tip is to choose a content management system that supports accessibility. So okay, you've already got the first tip. You've cleared it. You've chosen Drupal. There are plenty of options, but WordPress, for example, is also an option. But we're here talking about Drupal. So the first tip is to use headings correctly to organize your content. And what this does is it means that your page is organized semantically. So instead of using headings to create, because you want something that's big and blue, for example, you use headings to organize your content. So you'll have an H1, that's probably the page title, and sections within your page will have headings. And so you can use styles, and when you're developing your theme, you use styles to control the visual presentation, and you use headings to create a semantic view of the page. One thing that Lucy didn't show, but that screener users also use, is they can navigate by headings. They can call up a list of headings and jump to the one that they think is going to get them where they want to go. Because just like sighted users, we skim. For example, when you're looking at a web page, you look at the headings, you look at the links, you get an overall picture of the web page before you decide what more you want to read. A screen reader user will also skim. by looking at the headings list or the links list. Proper alt text for images. If you have images in your theme that are decorative, you can either put them in the background using CSS, or you can leave the alt attribute empty. And that means that the screen reader will skip over that image and not present it as something can be interacted with. If the image has content, so for example, if you're a content creator and you're adding an image that's an illustration or that adds to the meaning of the page, it really needs to have alt text, particularly if it's used as a link, because otherwise the screen reader will just read out the file name as the destination of the link, and nobody wants that. Lucy covered unique and descriptive names for links. Color is another sticking point sometimes. There are a couple of aspects to this. One is color contrast. Color deficiency is a very common issue. Up to 10% of the population has a red-green color deficiency, which means they have red and green colors in the red and green hues look very similar to them. So if you're doing a stop and go kind of thing, it might not be accessible. On the other hand, for users who have learning disabilities, color is a great tool for giving hints about the organization of your site by using different colors of text or backgrounds to distinguish different sections. So you kind of have to keep both things in mind. On the one hand, you don't want to make it so that a color deficient user can't see the distinction, but color can also be a great cue for people with cognitive disabilities. Accessible forms. Drupal generally handles this. Drupal 7 handles this relatively well with its form API. So you'll be able to, if you're building forms, the forms will have labels and etc. that will allow screen reader users to interact with them and know what data they're entering into what field. So if you're doing custom development with forms, you just have to make sure that you're using the form API, what it provides to you in terms of labeling and field sets and all those other things. So is anyone building forms for custom content? Okay. Yeah. Yes, that is an acceptable tool. Yeah, because it just plugs into the form API. And that is one area in which there's a lot of work for Drupal 8 that's coming out, particularly to improve the error messages. Using tables for tabular data, not for layout. Layout tables don't linearize very well. What Lucy was saying about how the screen reader renders everything into basically a single column view. It takes your source code and presents it completely linear. So if you're using a table for layout, that doesn't necessarily present the content in the right order. That also affects tab order. If you're a keyboard-only user and you're tabbing through the page, it will tab through in source code order, not in the visual flow of the page, which can get confusing. However, if you are presenting tabular data, like you have a set of research results where you have rows and columns, tables are fine for that. Sometimes people think, oh, I shouldn't use tables for anything, but they're designed and built for tabular data, so if you have tabular data, go wild. Well, okay, not really go wild.
Well, caution.
Caution is always recommended, so for the keyboard-only stuff, mobility disabilities are very common, including repetitive stress injury. And a lot of people with repetitive stress injury find that they can use the keyboard okay, but the mouse really aggravates their injuries. So it is a growing disability, particularly among people with heavy computer use, graduate students, people in technology. So keeping an eye on the semantic structure of your page, the tab order, and how someone who's not using a mouse might interact with it will make your pages much more usable and accessible. ARIA roles and landmarks. ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and it allows you to add attributes to attributes to the source code that will assist people with disabilities in navigating the page. Lucy mentioned the landmarks. You can take any chunk of content on your page and designate it as the main content region using ARIA. You can take your footer and designate it as the footer using ARIA. You can also use native HTML5 elements to do this. So for example, there is a native footer element in HTML5, there's a native header element, and there's a native nav element, among other things. So our general advice is to start with HTML5 and then add ARIA to it. Would you concur with that?
No, that's absolutely it. It says use HTML5 and only enhance with ARIA when you're done in HTML5.
Right.
Those tags you add ARIA to those tags, or just one of them?
You can say nav role equals navigation. Sometimes that adds verbosity. The screen reader will basically say it twice. But
it's not supposed to, but sometimes it does, and it's always worth testing that kind of thing.
Right. So the landmarks, if you're building a theme, I think Zen comes with built-in landmarks, and you can, if you're sub-theming Zen, you can take a look at those and arrange them however you need.
Is that the only one?
Adaptive theme, I don't know, but it's easily added in a sub-theme. If you're using a base theme, you're probably not just using Zen or Adaptive right out of the box. Adaptive has a couple of things like, if you're using Corolla, or it has some pre-built sub-themes as well. Yeah, landmark is if you look at the source code, well, I don't want to bring up the source code here, but you can take any HTML element and you can add a role to it. So you could say div role equals navigation, and that is ARIA, and it says that this generic container should be understood as navigation. And you can say div role equals main content, or div role equals banner. So if you have like your masthead kind of thing at the top, and then that will allow people to navigate by landmark throughout it.
Well, it's giving you the structure and the outline of the page. So you'll notice on our site, if you were able to get familiar enough with the voice, you'll heard that it said banner when it hit the UC Berkeley and the search, and those items were within the banner. And then it said banner in. So it just kind of gives the screen reader user kind of an idea of where they are. But it also gives me a structure to jump through.
Yep.
If I'm remembering correctly, ARIA sort of was a bridge from HTML4, which didn't have a lot of this stuff. It was invented to give screen readers and other tools a way to identify otherwise generic regions. HTML5 kind of leapfrogged in some places, but in others haven't caught up, which is why there are two competing technologies seemingly doing the same thing, but not completely overlapping.
Right. Yes.
Absolutely.
That's true. So there is more that you can do with ARIA. If you're building an interactive application, you might want to take a look at alerts and form labels and other roles. Like you can take a chunk of content and assign it a role of dialogue, which means that any assistive technology that's looking at that will treat it as if it's a dialog box, a modal dialogue. And so you can create, light boxes, overlays, that kind of thing, and make them more accessible using ARIA. And which is a nice little segue here to the last tip, which is to make dynamic content accessible. If you have any kind of Ajax-y stuff going on, you have a page, and parts of it are updating at separate times, either automatically or based on a user request. And for a screen reader user in particular, since the whole page is loaded into a buffer, the screen reader doesn't always know when to refresh that buffer. It can recognize the page reload, but unless you give it a hint, it's not going to recognize that this little chunk has reloaded. And so using ARIA, you can have it take a look at that and have it alert the screen reader user, hey, something over here has changed. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail with ARIA, but we can answer questions about that later if it's of interest. So those are our top 10 tips, and if you keep those in mind when you're sub-theming or designing your own theme, you'll be like, well, I don't want to say 80% of the way, but maybe. Okay, I'll go out on a limb and say you'll be 80% on the way to creating an accessible website, because the theme really, it's what forms the basis of all the code on your website. There are a couple of issues with landmarks that I want to tip you off to. How many people here use panels in any context? One, anyone, two, three, four, okay. Anytime you have a page that's created out of chunks of different pages, you can get into a problem that I actually call it landmarkitis. It's sort of like divitis, where everything's a div, 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 div. The thing about divs is they are invisible to assistive technology. They're just generic containers. But if you're using a system that is creating lots of little mini chunks of content within your page, each one of those could potentially be a landmark. And so you'll have a lot of landmarks on the page that aren't, necessarily providing any extra information to a screen reader user or other assistive technology user. So you need to take a look at if you're using panels or display suite or anything else that allows you to combine lots of different chunks into a page. Take a look at the source code and see what kinds of landmarks are being generated and if all of them are 100% necessary. So, for example, HTML5 has the article tag. It's a native HTML5 tag. It's meant to describe a chunk of content like a blog post that there might be more than one of on a page. It also has the native section tag, which is meant to mark up a section of related content. For example, 3 articles could be in a section. And it also has the native header and footer tag. So I've actually seen a website where, there's a Drupal site, where there are a bunch of little boxes on the page, and each one of them was a section that had a header, an article, and a footer. And the header was just used to create a little colored line across the top. And the footer was just used basically for the read more link. So that's a case of landmarkitis. That means that there are 10 individual content chunks on the page, and each one of them has a header and a footer. That's getting a little nuts there. One last tip is that Drupal 7 has built in some selectors, some classes that you can use when you want to hide content, but make it available to someone who's using a screen reader. It also has a class that you can use to make that appear if you focus on it with the keyboard. So, for example, on our website, or let's look at this, actually, I'll do this one, just skip navigation. So when I'm tabbing through here, when I tab to the jump to navigation link, it appears. So it's not just for screen reader people to jump to navigation. If you're a keyboard-only user, you're tabbing through and this link appears and you can use it. When it's not in focus, it disappears. And Drupal 7 has the built-in element invisible, element focusable classes that you can use in case any one particular population is going to need more information about your page that you don't want to ever show visually or only want to show when it's focused.
Usually that's never showing.
Right.
Yeah.
So if so here I am a keyboard-only user and I'm tabbing through, I can see where the cursor is. I don't know. Yeah, I guess you can see it up there. If this did not appear when I focused on it, then I would be lost. There would be no indication of what I was focused on and what it would do. So if you have a hover effect or anything that's focusable, you really do have to be able to see it. Otherwise, you will get your keyboard-only users lost, and they won't know what part of the page they're interacting with. And they'll just have to keep hitting tab until they see something. So for example, I can tell now that I'm focused on the search box, I'm focused on the web accessibility link, the Berkeley link, and the jump to navigation. Also, if you hover over these links, you can see that the underline appears when you hover over them. And if you tab through them, you will also see, let's see if I can actually get tab through from here. Yeah, when I tab through them, you also see that the underline appears when I focus on it. And it's an easy thing to do when you're making a style sheet to make a hover class. Just keep in mind that you should probably be making a focus class at the same time if it's a focusable element. Does anyone have any questions on theme development, stuff that we covered? All right. Get that. You want to take the content?
Sure, this is real quick. So chances are, you know, as Lucy sort of demoed when she was showing off the links list, for example, in JAWS, sometimes even just the content on a website can make the accessibility part not so great for a screen reader user. So if you have a Drupal site, there's a good chance you have other users or editors who are making changes to your site. So just keep in mind to train, if you can, your editors to keep these best practices in mind. So descriptive links, just using headings properly, that sort of thing. And on that same vein, make sure just to evaluate your content every once in a while and make sure that this stuff isn't getting thrown in there without people really realizing it. And then best practices for multimedia and attached files, that just means if you choose the good video player, YouTube and Vimeo, generally the video controls are very accessible to people using a screen reader or just using a keyboard. And attached files, like if you're uploading PDFs and you're uploading Word documents, giving them good, short, descriptive names can be really helpful. And also, well, accessibility of PDFs is a whole other kettle of fish, but that's also something to research if you have the time.
Is it possible to restrict editors from uploading PDF? Not to completely ban it, but set a role that you need increased permission to upload PDF as opposed to other kinds of PDF?
Oh.
Yes. Yes, if you use something like the WYSIWYG module, then you can set you can configure a WYSIWYG profile that will have different restrictions for what kind of media you can upload. It's a bit into the weeds of WYSIWYG, so I can't guarantee that it'll work the way you want it to, because there. Yeah. And you don't have to change like the HTML tags that are allowed or the buttons that you see. You can just change what files you can upload in the media box. You might get there's a lot of semantics involved in building a Drupal site. For example, sensible content types, sensible roles that helps make it usable and accessible. And you probably won't want to proliferate too many WYSIWYG profiles. But you could take a look at that. Okay.
When in doubt, if you can help people use HTML, it's the ultimately more accessible means. PDFs can just be nightmarish.
Yep.
Yeah. We won't go into that because it's a whole. It would probably take another
presentation. It's another hour and a half.
Yeah.
Really. But we do have a video of it on our website. Right?
That's true. We do.
Yeah.
So there you go.
A couple years ago, the WebNet accessibility presentation was on PDF and other document accessibility, and we have a link to it on our site.
We do. Yeah. All right. I think that's it for this
All right.
switch. Oh, yeah, so tools for evaluating. There's I actually don't know a whole lot about this accessible content module. Go for it.
So the accessible content module is under some pretty heavy development these days. And what it is it allows you to evaluate the accessibility of your theme and also of user-generated content right in the WYSIWYG editor. It's a plugin. It uses a library, a JavaScript library called Quail. And the Drupal project name is Accessibility. So if you go to drupal.org project accessibility, you can see that you can install this module and all of its JavaScript dependencies. And then you can configure it so that it will pop up a little hint in the WYSIWYG editor if someone has, for example, entered an image without alt text. And you can tell it, it's highly configurable. You can tell it, I want to check for image alt text, but I don't want to check for font color, that kind of thing.
Does it always work on WYSIWYG?
No, it can do your whole site, but it can plug into TinyMCE and CK Editor, and both of those in the WYSIWYG module, if you use that, and also the CK Editor module you can plug in. And you can have it run reports on demand, like as people are editing, or you can turn those off and just have a report that, spiders your site and tells you what the issues are. It's different because AMP can't provide feedback to someone who is actually working right then in the site. AMP will spider your public pages and tell you what the issues are, but if someone's editing, then you can give them feedback right there. Hey, you forgot the alt text. And you can actually, I think, make it so they can't save it unless they put in the alt text. Or you can just pop up the warning, because in some cases, if an image is decorative, you don't want to control them that rigidly.
So we also have, let's see, I'll go back to our website for a second. Oops, I missed it. We have curated a whole bunch of free tools. Oops, that's not it either. There we go. This is all sorts of really helpful stuff that's available online, and I won't go into each and every one in nitty-gritty detail, but specifically what we wanted to show everyone was this Wave toolbar for Firefox, which is courtesy of a fabulous resource called WebAIM. So if I go to Drupal.org, for example, and then I use Lucy's toolbars, and how do I get there?
Are we in full screen mode? You don't want to get it out of full screen mode.
There we go.
I'm messing with my settings.
In your setting?
No,
we're not messing with anything, but
just kidding.
Options, add-ons.
Do you have the Wave toolbar installed?
Yeah, she does. We tried it earlier.
Get to it when it's
in the tools. It's in the tools menu, so Alt-T.
Okay, Alt-T. There you go.
Where's?
Yeah, this one.
There we go. Aha.
Wave.
Okay, so if I go to this little Wave toolbar, and then I hit this Errors, Features, and Alerts option, it'll do a quick scan of the site, and this is, you might find it's a little tough to read, especially on this page where there's a lot of stuff kind of grouped into this right-hand region here, but just as a quick understanding of what these symbols mean. So these little green boxes that say WAI-ARIA, that's just saying that there's ARIA being used here, which that's more of a FYI more than anything else. It also points out the semantic structure of the page, so there's an H1 used here, there's an H2 used here. It can just be helpful when you want to know a general structure of your site. These little yellow things, yellow sort of indicates that this is something you might want to look at. It's saying that it's an alert as far as problematic link text, but I would argue that it's more, that's up to you to determine whether you think that's problematic or not. Because for Lucy, as you could remember earlier, when she was getting through the primary navigation, all that stuff was pretty easy for her to understand. And I would say it's the same thing here too. But these alerts are just sort of scanning for maybe if you had a link farther down the page and it wasn't very descriptive, they were trying to tell you, like, maybe look at this and see if it would make sense for a screen reader user as well. And then these other green features are for form labels. These are other things that are helpful to the screen reader user. Some of these, this table over here is an unordered list. Again, this is just semantic stuff. And then I wish there was...
You said it did detect an error.
Yeah, I don't see any red, though. So if you did have an error, you would get some red popping up.
Like this?
No. Earlier, when I did this on Drupal.org, and there was a different image down here, it was actually a linked image without alt text. So I got a big red button that said alt text missing on linked image, which if you don't add alt text to an image that's clickable, the issue then is the screen reader is going to read just the file name. So if the file name was, logo.jpg, it would literally read logo.jpg to a screen reader user. So that would be one example of an accessibility error that Wave would find and let you know, and you could go in and fix. So, this is, at the end of the day, still just a machine, and it's not going to find, and a lot of stuff, we still encourage end-user testing, but it can be a really good way just to do a quick search and see how you might be able to improve things. So we have that linked over here just to download directly into Firefox, and there's a few other options as well. And then on the bottom here, we have your color contrast tools. And because those are some, actually color contrast might be some of the easiest things to fix. So you might even start there and go on from there. Okay. Where were we? Let's see. All right. Advanced, if time allows, which I think we have time.
All right. So, are there any questions on what we've covered so far? Any additional? All right. So, some things we can talk about if people are interested are ARIA and JavaScript a little bit more in depth, making the administrator and editor experience accessible, how to keep up with accessibility advances in Drupal, and what's going on in Drupal 8. So does anyone have a burning curiosity about one of these or some other aspect of accessibility?
Yeah.
Okay. So the administrator-editor experience, the main thing that is going to drive everyone nuts is the WYSIWYG editor. And how do you use it as a user with a disability or a screen reader user or anything? And we have found that the TinyMCE and CK editor are basically usable. And you wouldn't know it from looking at them, but when you're using them, you can hit Alt F10, and you will be in the toolbar, and then you can arrow and tab through the toolbar. And Lucy, you want to say anything about your experience using that when we tested it?
It's tedious, but actually very doable. I mean, as soon as you tab into it with the screen reader active, it actually tells you immediately that you can use Alt F10 to get into the toolbar. The biggest issue is that you go into the toolbar and then you have to arrow through every single option to get to the one you want. And then the next time you go back to the toolbar, it brings you back that same option, and it's a bit of a learning curve for the person to familiarize themselves with it. The thing they need to know is that it becomes an application at this point in time. So a person needs to arrow through, not tab through controls. Typically on a web page, you're tabbing. When you go to the toolbar, you must arrow through, space, or enter on controls. It's going to vary when you hit space, when you hit enter, when you hit up arrow, when you hit left arrow, when you hit down arrow, so forth. So a person needs to really be comfortable with those things before they try to create content.
Right. And one thing that will make that easier for everybody is if it's consistent. If you don't have different toolbars for different pages, for example, without like a really dire need. Because a lot of the stuff that's accessibility issues that would be a real pain for someone who's coming to your site without any information, with documentation and training and familiarity, they become a lot more usable, even if it's annoying to have to tab and arrow through, but you're not going to get stuck. You're not going to be completely lost without an ability to do your work.
Previous versions would do things like you couldn't actually get out of the editor once you were in.
Yeah.
So you couldn't even get to the save button.
Right. So the arrowing, using the editor toolbar like that is not just for screen reader users. Anyone can hit Alt F10 and then use it with the keyboard. The other thing that I want to bring up is that some of us are using panels here. As it is right now, the panels in-place editor and all of the add widgets and stuff are depressing in their lack of accessibility. And I've actually been in contact with the Panoply maintainer and the Panels and CTools maintainers, and some patches are going in which will make it better. But for now, I can tell you that if you're using Firefox and you're a keyboard-only user, Panels IPE, which is the in-place editor, is completely unusable. And if you're using Chrome IE or Safari, it is a pain. But this is one thing to keep an eye out for, and one thing that we're doing here, since we're working on our Open Berkeley distribution, which is based on Panoply, we're contributing stuff back to Panoply, and then Panoply is helping contribute stuff back to Panels and CTools. So the ability to add content, to move content, anything that's drag and drop, if someone's not thinking and not using an accessible drag and drop, which Drupal core really isn't built in, keyboard-only user won't be able to use it. Screen reader user won't be able to use it. So the core Drupal stuff usually has some kind of thing where you can assign a numeric weight to something to move it up or down on a list. But the panel's IPE doesn't, and you just have to drag and drop it if you want to move it. So anything else about the administrator and editor experience?
So there's a question in the comments on the Hangouts that it's not quite the administrator-editor experience. I think it's more about landmarks and stuff.
Okay, go for it.
And the question is, if we do a view with pages through 1 year of past meetings at a time using Apex, would coding area live equal flight on the div that's changing the subscription technique?
Do you get the question now?
I'm not. So let me explain what polite would do first, and then you tell me if that fills in the role, because I'm not quite sure what you're trying to get the thing to do. So ARIA Live means that the screen reader is notified that there's a change on that particular region of the screen, and polite says that the screen reader is busy and it may be giving the screen reader user some other information. When the screen reader is finished, polite will then start speaking the new information that has popped up. If you change that to rude, it will interrupt the screen reader. Sorry, it's not rude. It used to be called
assertive.
Rude. Sorry, they keep changing the name, so it's now assertive. If you use the role of assertive, it will interrupt the screen reader. So what I'm understanding you want to do is that you have a bunch of items populating in the screen, and you don't want to interrupt the screen reader, but once the screen reader is finished, say, reading another part of the page, you then want them to know that something has changed and what it is that has changed. You can use polite. I'm not sure from your description of what the action you're trying to do would be appropriate use of polite. Or even ARIA alert at all.
So I guess the follow-up question would be, is this something where a user action brings more items into view, or more items come into view automatically? Like, are we talking infinite scrolling, or you know, click a previous next link? So if you want to take some time to type or whatever, we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Lucy, do you want to say anything about infinite scrolling?
Infinite scrolling can be a nightmare of accessibility. There is a couple of modules out there where people have done a successful job of infinite scroll. But the problem you have to be aware of when you're using an infinite scroll, first of all, if a person is using a links list, for example, and your infinite scroll has links within it, those links will not appear in the links list until, of course, the scroll is activated, and then other content disappears from the links list. The other part of infinite scroll is it can be for keyboard-only users. Say your infinite scroll is in the center column, and the person is now tabbed into your infinite scroll, and your infinite scroll is scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and they need to get something at the far right of your page. They're never going to get to it. So use infinite scroll with caution and give people the ability to escape from it in some way.
Okay.
There is a really good module. Did we point to Brian's stuff on our page?
Brian Garaventa?
Yeah. So there is a module that has been created by a gentleman, Brian Garaventa, who is that has done an accessible infinite scroll, and his actually works really nicely on iOS even. Look for the accessible rich internet applications tools that he has. I believe the URL is whatsock.com.
Yeah. Yes, whatsock.
Sort of, yeah. Wouldn't expect you to remember that, but yeah, it is on our tools page.
Yeah. Anyone interested in Drupal 8 or other? Yeah, do I hear yes? No? Yes? Okay. Okay. Superfish menus? Yeah, I don't have any direct experience working with Superfish. That's a CSS and JavaScript expanding, collapsing, flyout menu solution. And what problem are you having with it?
Oh, I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'm afraid that Aria and that is the one. We would love to see that as a clinic, just as an FYI.
Yeah, bring it in, because
Because then we can see the issues and we can work through it and research it for you.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to their project page, they do actually list this bullet point, keyboard accessible screen at the camera. So it'd be interesting to test to see what that is. And a lot of times, again, when you turn around, they could post something that's to their issue to and feedback. And really, when they go out of the way to list that were accessible and screens at a time, they'll be very open to things for your input. And if you're not right patches, they'll love you for that.
Okay. So a couple of things about ARIA and JavaScript and Drupal. Drupal comes with, jQuery and uses it in a bunch of places. I did mention that the alternative for their drag and drop is that you can, in many cases, set a numerical weight that will set an order in a list, like for menus, etc. The Drupal 7 core is generally relatively accessible in its use of JavaScript. For example, if you have like a term reference field where it's got an auto-suggest, where you type and it suggests options, Lucy, you found that was usable for you.
It works fine, yeah.
Yeah, it works fine. Yeah. However, we use the link it module. Does anyone here use the link it module? Yeah, it's when you're in a WYSIWYG editor and creating a link, it allows you to start typing the title of a page, and it'll pop up suggestions, and you can choose one of those to be the destination of your link. That auto-suggest actually was not usable. So it's doing something other than what they're doing in core. But core, generally speaking, you won't go too far wrong with the JavaScript that's provided in Drupal core. Also, we found that the FAQ module, their built-in expand collapse display style is not keyboard accessible. You can't expand or collapse the FAQs.
And isn't it also in the screen reader, it doesn't indicate to the screen reader user that the content is expanded, right? Yep. So they hit it and it expands, but they don't know what to do next, essentially.
Yep. Anything else about ARIA and JavaScript?
No, I know you have on your site some great videos on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a registration thing. You send an email and then it sends you back an access.
The Simply Accessible.
Oh, the Simply Accessible, yes.
I think so. And I got halfway through and I had to leave and just post up and then I maybe do it again, but I never got another company.
Oh. So you don't. So you have your password currently, or you do not?
I don't recall. I went through the first time and I wasn't able to go through both videos, so I dropped it. And then when I came back,
look for the email that sent you what your username and password was. It hasn't changed. You're supposed to be able to go back as many times as you want and use that. And as an FYI, do it soon because they may be taking these down. We're negotiating with them to keep them up, but they may be taking them down.
Yeah. For everyone else's reference, there's a contract with a third-party company called Simply Accessible, and they've provided these two informative videos. One about forms, right?
Mm-hmm. Forms, and one about JavaScript. Right?
That was it. Yeah. Very long and in depth, but you have to get access. You have to write to their email and ask them to, because that's the only way that they can provide them for free, essentially. So what Lucy's saying is we only had a certain number of hours contracted with the company, and I think they might be getting down to the bottom, but we're working on getting more. So.
Okay. What we're hoping, they're going to give us the videos, and what we're hoping is that we may be able to post those on the UC Learning Center.
Yeah. Okay. Make it a little easier to get to.
Okay. Anything else on administrator and editor experience? Any questions? Okay.
And do you find it, on this topic, do you find that navigating the administrator interfaces is okay, or are there problem areas? Or?
The problem that we run into, I think, is that there are just, depending on what you're using, if you're using any kind of administrative menu like navbar or admin menu, there are just a ton of links to get through. We haven't done a lot of testing on administration beyond content editing. So, but that's, on our list.
It is doable, and it did work, but there's a learning curve, and there's a lot of retention that a person has to have. Like a person can't have, no memory of what to do and do it, which is a disability in itself. Sometimes people need, a little bit more support cognitively. And, I found it was really tough, but frankly, there's a lot to remember. And having a good tutorial will really help. And who knows, maybe one day we'll write one, but probably not. Because it'll change.
Content editing seems pretty straightforward.
It is. It was fairly straightforward, fairly doable. I maintain a WordPress site myself, and it did seem simpler than WordPress. But I also only spent 2 or 3 hours on it. So.
Okay.
We've got like panels like each that you go and customize this page, and they've got all the drag and blocks around, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that the biggest pain point, or the bigger pain point?
The biggest pain point with the panels IPE is that if you're using Firefox, you can't use it at all. The dragging and dropping, so with the patches that are going into panels and Panelizer, it will now be much clearer for keyboard-only users that you can tab through, because they committed the error of having a hover class but not a focus class for every button on the page, the add, the settings, no focus class. So that is now better, and you can tab through and activate the add content buttons and use them. The one thing that you really cannot do is the dragging panes or widgets from one region to another, or to change the weight of them.
It seems like there could be in the future like an arrow key
Yep.
solution to that.
Yep.
Yep.
That. Well, I'm talking about it. I don't know if anyone else is. One of the things that the Brian Garaventa, who does the WhatSock, he's done a lot of things that are sort of proof of concept and actually working for accessible drag and drop. So that might be one thing to investigate: is can we take that and build it into Panelizer, and so we can have accessible drag and drop with the arrow key.
His drag and drop is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've ever been able to drag and drop since the days of OS 7 and Outspoken, where I could literally find an item, pick it up, move somewhere else, and drop it. So it is possible to do it.
Garaventa, Garaventa. But the WhatSock is linked from our resources page, isn't it?
It's on. It's accessible dynamic content. ACD.
Yeah, it's on our accessibility resources for site and content owners page.
Not for developers?
No.
Okay. It should be on both.
Yeah.
The focus class in the Zen startup CSS, was that something you added?
For the jump to navigation, I don't know, Kathleen?
The jump to nav, I think there is something in the Zen that you can use that for once. I don't remember seeing it in adapter.
Well, the element focusable is in core Drupal 7, so you can use it in anything, whether...
You can use it with Chrome API too. So the
Yeah.
API setup that you use in that thing
To add a class, yeah.
Yeah, you only have to whitelist the classes if you're using it in the content itself, right, as opposed to the theme.
Yeah, if you're using any kind of filter, text filter, WYSIWYG, you have to whitelist all of the classes and IDs that you might be using. So element invisible, you have to whitelist that. So this is our resources page, and here's a link to Brian Garaventa's stuff, ACDC, Accelerated Dynamic Content.
Can I switch back quickly to the filter lists? I'm glad to hear that is somewhat accessible, because we have plans to use that, or other place where you button something from the list, and it shortens that list, like a filtration. And also include sort of auto-suggest.
Yep. So the auto-suggest works really well. What you want to do is you might want to add a assertive alert on the number of results. So as your number gets smaller, it may say, 3 found, 2 found, 1 found. So the person doesn't keep typing to 0.
Right.
Yep. That's just what I would do.
Okay.
Sort of means interrupt and say it right now, say it right now.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an ARIA alert, yes.
Okay.
There's tons and tons in the ARIA spec. You can get mired by reading the entire, and it just became an official spec in March of this year.
So as long as I'm dynamically changing the audio, the survey, thing I know, it keeps anything else in
Yeah. Exactly, and use it with caution.
Yeah.
Because if it's interrupting something else, you don't want to have it do that.
Okay. All right. Anyone interested in keeping up with advances in Drupal? Yeah, okay. So, in Drupal, a lot of stuff goes on in the issue queue. That's really where all of the action is. So, for example, in many cases, someone who files an accessibility issue will tag it with accessibility. Like, does anyone mind if I just sort of show something here?
There is a wonderful accessibility community, very active, all volunteer.
You said the same about WordPress?
Yes, I can say that there's WordPress. Except the WordPress people are focusing on theme mostly, and they're not necessarily working on WordPress core, and a lot of the plugins can like.
Oh, come on. It's not searching on the tag. No. Log into search. Why do they do that to you? Why? Why? Okay, well, anyway.
I think there's actually one in this chat. If the Skype window still open. No, we closed it. So there is a Skype chat for the Drupal accessibility group where they'll send issues and people test the issues. They do some really.
You get on there.
You speak to somebody who's already in the Skype chat and they can add you. So send me your Skype name and I'll add you. And it's not high traffic. It's not very high traffic at all.
So, for example, here's the Panoply issue queue. This is actually add visual indicator of tab focus on IPE, which is go, which refers to this patch in this issue in panels. So this issue is tagged with accessibility. That's one way you can find them. So if you go to the issue queue for your project and see if anything's tagged with accessibility, you can see the progress on it. For example, this one is RTDC. It's my patch, hey. And if you click on the accessibility tag, you can see all issues for panels that have been, all issues for everything that have been marked up with accessibility. Why do they do that? Okay. Let's do that. So there it is. And there's also a accessibility group on groups.drupal.org. And if you ever go to a camp or a con or anything, there's going to be probably at least one accessibility presentation. There's often a BOF, birds of a feather. And I don't know, I don't know if there's a separate IRC channel for accessibility. Or is it just the Skype chat?
I think it's just the Skype chat.
All right.
They do use the IRC, an IRC channel when they do their scrums, but they mostly just the Skype chat.
Right.
And the scrums are held at, I think, 6 p.m. on Sundays.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
That shows you how much of a volunteer group it is.
Yeah.
But people who are involved in it are people from the Government of Canada, nonprofits throughout the U.S., and several different agencies throughout Europe are doing the accessibility.
And, oops.
In fact, the Government of Canada templates are in Drupal. Yeah, there was nothing anyway.
Okay. So, are you guys interested in Drupal 8? Okay. So, what? Yeah, I know, really. Well, they were saying 2015 last. I got into a conversation at DrupalCon and someone said, "Oh, realistically 2015 for Drupal 8." 2015. That's next year. So Drupal 8, as you probably all know, is completely rewritten, gutted and rewritten, using Symfony framework and all kinds of improvements, changes in the paradigm of developing, etc. Specifically for the user experience, they're doing a lot with in-place editing. So if you're on a view, for example, that has, if you're logged in and you're on a view that has a bunch of results, you'll be able to click and edit right in place. And one of the things they're doing for the accessibility of that is they're constraining the tabbing so that you can only tab in what you have in the chunk that you're working on. So you'll be able to do a quick edit on a node page, which means just click in the body, and it'll pop open the editor, and you'll only be able to tab within that editor until you close it, in which case then you can now tab to the whole thing. They're also providing a whole framework for adding announcements. There's this Drupal announce thing where you'll be able to programmatically, using their API, send Drupal content that should be spoken in various contexts. So you can trigger an announce event, and it will, I assume, using ARIA alerts, will speak that out loud. So those are the couple things I know about. Also, there's a ton of work on the form API and improving the experience of error messages. Because now if you submit a form in Drupal and you leave out a required field, the error messages are in a box at the top, and it doesn't allow you to jump to the field that's an error. But there's a whole lot of work going on for that in Drupal 8 to make it really easy to get to know that there's an error, to see what the error is, to jump to the field where there's an error and fix it.
Currently, the only way in Forms API to actually notify the user that the field is required is by using either the invisible text or visibly putting in the word required. Punctuation doesn't get spoken by most screen reader users because we turn it off because it's frustrating. Well,
Yes.
Use the asterisk because it's an internationally recognized symbol and people with cognitive disabilities use that. But you also need to, currently with the way you have to do it is use the word required in the field. Yeah, you can make it invisible or you can make it visible, it's up to you, but they are actually adding the ARIA rule of required true and false to the Forms API for 8. Carolina, exact same thought.
Yep. So here's our form. The red star is what's provided by the form API, and we have put in required here to make it clear that it's required.
And I tested this with Lucy specifically, and she was pleased with how it read to her in particular, correct?
Yes, no, I mean, it's giving me the information to properly. And
It sounds like Drupal 8 needs to rebuild the site from the ground up.
Well, Drupal 8 is going to have the migrate module built in so that and Brian, you might know more about this just generally from using the migrate module. So rather than upgrading in place, what you'll probably do is bring up a new Drupal 8 site and then using the built-in migrate function, migrate all of your content into it. And migrate is very, very powerful. And my only hope would be that they also make it easy to use. So.
Currently, you have to actually, well, Drupal to Drupal migrations are better and better. There's a submodule called migrate that's totally migrated to Drupal 7, 5, 7. And so the DBP module will probably be Drupal 8. And
yeah.
In the migrate module.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things to understand about what's going on, and people call it the migraine module. Once you get over your migraine and understand some paradigms, it can take a lot of trouble and a lot of manual work. So, it's coming along. Hopefully by the time we get through one.
Did we ever hear back from the person on the web with their question?
He wrote back and he just basically said it's fine if the screen reader doesn't get interrupted. Because the changing content will only be indicated by the user. The user will in fact click the previous or next secure link. I will not be using.
Good.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
2 thumbs up. All right. So, any other questions on accessibility and Drupal?
So if I have specific questions,
Email us. Yeah, you can go to our website. And there's a contact. There's a
Web access at berkeley.edu.
Yeah. Yeah, we also have the web access list, which is a relatively low volume mailing list on which we announce our web access clinics and meetings. If you have a site that you want us to review, request a clinic.
And it sounds like you have ones we want to review. So.
Yes, yes. So if, for example, it would be really great because when we do a review, we all learn something new every time, and it would be great if Superfish is an issue for you, just bring it in.
Superfish, view tabs.
View tabs, okay, yeah. We'd love to get a crack at those because we'll be, we're right in this as Drupal site owners and developers too. So, and anything we can figure out about either workarounds or patches or anything to make it work would be great.
And each time we do one of our clinics, we bring something new to the group. So it's also really, even if you don't have a site that you want to share with anybody, it's worth coming to the clinics just to attend, to learn, and participate.
Right.
What were you going to say?
So using the date module and all that, and having a sort of
date picker kind of a thing?
Calendar, well, I mean, on the front end.
A display, grid display?
Yeah, like that. Normal calendar.
Yeah.
That
It depends entirely on how it's marked up.
Yeah.
So we'd bring one in. We'd love to check it. Yeah.
I think it's hard to send a date module.
Right. Yeah. Is anyone using the date module to create a grid view calendar? You are? Bring it in.
Yeah.
Woo! We're very friendly. We don't like.
We're not like
we do not use a shame-based model of behavior modification.
Yes.
Okay.
And we bring treats.
And we do bring treats. There are often baked goods at our meetings. Yeah.
So if people are curious, actually, if you could navigate to the home page, Caroline, and then go towards the bottom of the page, we have a link to our web access calendar on VCal. So at any time you can just come and take a look at this, and you'll see our clinics are the first and third Monday of every month, and I'll indicate whether or not it's been reserved or not. And then we also put on external. We don't put them on. Sorry, I add external events to the calendar when we get the information about them. So in this case, there's an external webinar coming up from, I believe that's the same company that makes the AMP tool for accessibility. Are putting on a really helpful webinar about ARIA. So we try to populate the calendar with that sort of stuff too. So keep an eye on it, and there's lots of learning opportunities there. And our open clinics, which I'll indicate on the calendar too. As we've mentioned, if you just want to show up and you can hear while we go through someone else's site and provide some feedback and best practices, that's a really good opportunity for everyone in attendance to learn. So.
I said Bart not to be confused with the
No.
Yes.
That'd be funny if the transit system also worked on accessibility, though.
Yeah, well, they do, but
in different ways.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. It's always great to see you here. Our next meeting will be, I forget the exact date, but it's the Monday in July, and it will be on automated testing. Yes, so see you all there. All right.